misconception about Irish unification is that it would be economically very costly to the Republic and impossible to accept. What critics tend to say is Northern Ireland is currently heavily subsidised by the UK, and the Republic would simply have to take over the entirety of that subsidy. If unification is to take place, the overall strategy should be to combine the best of the North with the best of the South.
Proponents of a united Ireland say now is the time to plan what unity would look like. It's not as straightforward as you might think. The costs, politics and public mood on both sides of the border remain deeply uncertain. Joining me now is Brendan O'Leary, Professor of Political Science at the University of Pennsylvania and the author of Making Sense of a United Ireland. Thank you very much for taking time for us today. You've written extensively about this topic. What would you say are the biggest misconceptions about Irish unity?
Thank you, Daniel, for having me on your programme. I think the biggest misconception about Irish unification is that it would be economically very costly to the Republic and impossible to accept. I think the second emphasis that people place has more foundation, namely the fact that most of Northern Protestants inside Northern Ireland resist the idea of Irish unification. But there are ways in which I think that can be addressed. The third misconception is that there is insufficient support for unification North and South. I think the likely trajectory, for reasons I can give, is that on both sides of the border, support for reunification will occur sometime in the next decade, particularly possible in the early part of the next decade.
Okay, so maybe you could bring us up to date as to where the effort to unite the North and the South stand today, not just in terms of the opinion polls to get to the border poll, the referendum which would decide, or referenda, maybe on both sides of the border, but also in terms of formulating a model about what Irish unification would look like.
So for unification to take place, there do have to be two referendums, because it's almost certainly the case that the Republic has to amend its constitution in some respect, and that by the Republic standards, that requires a vote of the entire citizenry. And obviously there has to be a vote in favour of unification in the North. At the moment, there is no formal planning for unification in the Republic. The UK, of course, does not engage in planning because nominally it is in favour of maintaining the Union, and it has no obligation to plan for unification. Therefore, the responsibility for such planning rests with the Republic. There are lots of organisations and political parties who argue that it is the current duty of the Government of the Republic of Ireland to prepare for unification. There are lots of things they could do in this respect, which I can elaborate. But in the absence of that initiative by the Government of the Republic, civil society organisations, think tanks, intellectuals of various kinds are exploring all the potential benefits and potential costs attached to unification.
So, Brendan, I've taken a look at some of the comments that we've received under previous YouTube videos that we've done on this topic or about Irish or Northern Irish politics. And so I'll put a few of those to you throughout this interview. Now, here's one which says, quite simply, time for Britain to leave. And this is something that is repeated in under several of the videos. Is it as simple as that? Is it just Britain should relinquish its claim and leave, and it's as simple as that, and it could be as simple as that if Westminster wanted it, or is it more complicated than that?
Goldfish, juice boxes, cookies, all the food groups.
Well, the UK could irresponsibly withdraw without notice at any juncture. It's done that at various times in its history, notably in its withdrawal from Mandate Palestine. But the UK and the Irish governments have their conduct bound by an international treaty, the Good Friday Agreement, also known as the Belfast Agreement. And under that agreement, it requires the consent in referendums of both the North and South before unification can take place. In principle, those referendums could take place without any prior preparation by the Republic. And it could be the case that the government in London could announce a call for a referendum without giving prior notice to the Republic. I think that's unlikely, but it's not a possibility that can be completely excluded. They might even irresponsibly hold a referendum with short notice in the conviction that by doing so, they'd be more likely to win it. So that's one more reason, in my view, why the government of the Republic should prepare now, at least 5 years before the likelihood of the first possible referendum.
Okay, and another comment says here, a lot of people in Ireland seem to presume Northern Ireland would just be subsumed into the Irish Republic and all will be well. Behind the Ireland will be free slogans, I've not heard a lot about how integrating the unionist minority in Northern Ireland into a nationalist majority state would actually work. What are the kind of the theories going around? I realise there isn't a fixed model yet, but what are the ideas around that?
Broadly speaking, I think serious analysts have converged on two possible models of a future united Ireland. In one, Northern Ireland would be dissolved, its institutions would disappear, it would no longer exist as a political entity. It would become part of the Republic of Ireland fully. Its 6 counties would have forms of county government like those that exist in the rest of the island. So that's the integrated model of Irish unification. And that's strongly preferred by citizens of the Republic, and it's preferred by a significant proportion of Northern Ireland nationalists, those who would like to see Irish unification. The second model would involve the persistence of Northern Ireland as a devolved unit inside the Republic of Ireland. Currently, Northern Ireland is a devolved unit of government inside the United Kingdom. This model would involve transferring the sovereign power from London to Dublin, but Northern Ireland would persist with the devolved government with its existing power sharing arrangements. Now, this possibility is allowed for in Article 15 of the Constitution of Ireland. It was put in place many years ago in 1937, precisely as a way of providing some assurances to Northerners that their history and identity would not be completely eliminated in the event of unification. Now, each of these models has costs and benefits, but that's precisely where I think it's important that public debate occur in the Republic and planning occur and a decision has to be made which particular model is going to be offered as and when referendums take place.
Okay, let's dive into that a little bit more. So Mary Lou MacDonald, who's the leader of Sinn Féin, which is the party with the loudest voice in favour of unification, let's say, certainly has the biggest platform in favour of unification. It says now is the time to have a discussion about the model for United Ireland, saying that such a consultation must reach out to the British, the Unionists in Northern Ireland. Many Unionists, of course, feel their British identity would be diminished or erased in a united Ireland. So what mechanisms could there be to reassure them?
Well, first of all, it's their right and privilege not to participate in any discussions if they don't want to about United Ireland. They can't be coerced into doing that, and I would oppose any efforts to oblige them to plan for an objective that they don't like. That said, we do know from surveys that my colleagues and I have conducted that a very high proportion of the unionist community wants planning to take place so that they know what they're eventually voting on. Even though they don't want unification to take place, they do believe it's important to plan. I think many things can be done to give them reassurance. We know from survey evidence that the most important thing for most unionists in the event of a scenario that they strongly dislike is to be able to preserve their British citizenship. And that is allowed for in the terms of the Good Friday Agreement. That's a commitment by the British government, and it's a birthright commitment without qualification, namely anybody born in what is currently Northern Ireland who is lawfully resident there is entitled to British citizenship till the end of time, as far as we know. So the government of Ireland would have to respect that British citizenship right in perpetuity. And I don't think it would have any difficulty in doing so, because one of the pledges in the Good Friday Agreement is to allow people to identify as British or Irish or both as they see fit. So that's the most important priority. The second is, I think, largely in the cultural domain. It would be important not to impose the Irish language as an educational requirement in the 6 counties of Northern Ireland. Obviously, the Irish language deserves to be valued as it is in the Republic, but that doesn't require coercion. School choice should determine whether or not Irish is taught as a second language. Decisions would have to be made on the status of the Irish language. Currently, Irish is the language which prevails in constitutional interpretation. If there's a difficulty in interpreting the language of the Constitution in Irish as opposed to English, I think it would be important to equalise the status of those languages. And it would also be important to give some recognition to Ulster Scots. There's the area of religious freedom and the rights of people to organise according to their religious preferences. I think the Republic has done a good job in that respect in recent years, and I think it could be expected to consolidate separation of church and state and the protections of religious freedoms. There are many other things that will be necessary to provide assurances to the Protestant population, the British identifying population, that if a United Ireland is created, they will not lose everything. Not just they will not only be able to keep their British citizenship, but their assets, their private property will be secure. There will be no effort there will be no effort in any sense to carry out some kind of historical revenge operation. Now, the best way to do that is to ensure the highest standards of rights protection and to consider ways in which the courts will be composed in future so that people have an idea of how their rights are going to be credibly protected. So these are the core things that have to be properly prepared. Now, one of the biggest assurances, judging by contemporary public opinion, that unionists would seek is the persistence of Northern Ireland as a devolved unit. Now, that preference could change over time, so it may not be necessary to persist with devolution forever, but it's something that planners will have to consider before a referendum. Do they put forward the idea of a continuing devolved Northern Ireland, or do they allow for the possibility of its abolition? Do they give it a time-limited period with people having a right to vote on its continuation after a certain interval? Then there are power sharing provisions that have to be contemplated. Should there be a vice president, and should that vice president come from the British identifying population? Should the composition of the Irish Senate, which is a weak second chamber, should it be modified to guarantee a certain proportion of people from a British identifying community? What rules should attach to cabinet formation, the formation of what the Irish Constitution officially calls the government? Should there be guaranteed places for those of a British or Protestant identifying community? Should there be specific provision for representation for Northern Ireland inside the cabinet? These are some among the many questions that will have to be properly addressed to give the right kinds of reassurances.
So you said in there that the Protestant, the British supporting population of Northern Ireland wouldn't lose anything or wouldn't lose anything great of significance, and that's part of the reassurance. But one of our commenters here says, so Northern Ireland would lose the NHS, free GPs and prescriptions, affordable housing, affordable cars, no VRT, vehicle registration tax. Yeah, great idea, which is, I assume, is sarcastic. What do you have to say to that? Because there would be a massive shift, and it may end up bringing some of the things which even frustrate people in the Republic to the north.
Absolutely. I think that if unification is to take place, the overall strategy should be to combine the best of the North with the best of the South, and not, in my view, to impose every single existing law and public policy of the Republic on Northern Ireland. Now, health is an interesting question. At the moment, we know that life expectancy in the Republic is better than life expectancy in Northern Ireland. It's also clear that the Southern health system, though it has deficiencies, gives better outcomes than the NHS, the National Health Service, in the North. At the moment, the National Health Service in the North basically is a system that gives everybody the right to join a long queue. By comparison, in the South, yes, you do have to pay to see your doctor. You do have to be enrolled in an insurance scheme, but by and large, you get better outcomes. Now, personally, I'd be in favor of a universal insurance scheme, North and South, to ensure full and widespread access. But I think this is exactly the kind of subject that needs to be talked about and planned. As for housing, absolutely. At the moment, housing is very, very expensive in the Republic of Ireland. That's partly a straightforward supply problem. It's partly linked to planning regulations, which will have to be addressed. But it's also a sign of the dramatic success of the Republic's economy. The reason housing is cheap in Northern Ireland is that Northern Ireland is significantly less well off than the Republic. So these are exactly the kinds of questions that need to be raised. At the moment, we know that the public in the North would like to keep the NHS-style system in which access to healthcare is free at the point of need. And that's widely liked in the Republic as well. But a big discussion will have to take place. Do they transfer the southern system to the North? Do they keep the northern system inside a devolved government in the North? Do they fuse the two systems? This is exactly the kind of detailed question that needs to be addressed now.
Okay, and it looks like about 2/3 of those in the Republic would vote in favour in a referendum for Irish unity. Why are 1/3 of people in the Republic still hesitant? Is it just the unknown factor, or is there more to it?
I think about 10, just over 10 to maybe 11, 13, 14% are solidly opposed in the Republic. The rest are undecided. I think it's partly fear. It's partly fear that the arrival of a minority that was hostile to Irish independence, that behaved aggressively towards the Northern Catholic minority during most of the history of Northern Ireland, that would generate the renewed possibility of conflict. So they need to be reassured that a united Ireland is not immediately going to be a recipe for a civil war. Secondly, they're fearful that Irish reunification will be expensive. The Republic of Ireland is a dramatic economic success story, particularly since the mid-1980s. Between the 1920s and the 1980s, the Republic's economic performance lagged most of Europe. So many people, particularly in the older generations, are worried that unification could be costly and could be destabilizing. So those are the primary anxieties that the government of Ireland needs to address among its own population.
Yes, so that links into another comment. What most people seem to gloss over is how much it will cost taxpayers in the Republic if the North joins us. People in West Germany are still paying a specialised tax after unification in 1989. As someone from the Republic, I'd be happier to see the North belong to the people of the North and maintain a no borders policy. When it comes to tax, for example, so a solidarity tax is what it's called in Germany, and also about the financial transfers in general, do we know how large these might be and whether Dublin, whether the population in the Republic are ready to bear them? I mean, I imagine that could be quite an unpopular aspect.
So these are fair questions, but it's important to get rid of a lot of mythology. I'm glad you raised the case of German unification. The Republic of Ireland is richer today per head by whatever statistic you choose as your metric than Germany was, West Germany was in 1989, and Germany of today's world. Northern Ireland is better off significantly than East Germany was in 1989. So the comparative costs of unification will be much less in the case of Irish unification. In the case of German unification, you had system integration. The East Germany was a centralized command planning economy, a communist economy. It was remade into the German capitalist economy, modified by social market principles. That was an enormous and very painful process, particularly for East Germans. Nothing comparable will be required in Irish unification. Both countries have significantly sized public sectors. Both countries have significantly sized private sectors. They've operated within the European Union until very recently together. So the same laws and regulations apply. Now, obviously, Northern Ireland is no longer, along with the rest of the UK, inside the European Union. But as a result of an agreement known as the Protocol, they're inside the European Union for certain provisions of the single market in goods and in agriculture. So there won't be a dramatic change in overall rules and regulations on how the economy operates. What critics tend to say is Northern Ireland is currently heavily subsidised by the UK, and the Republic would simply have to take over the entirety of that subsidy. The technical term known for these discussions is the subvention. Now, the subvention is an estimate, and I want to emphasize that word estimate. It's an estimate of the gap between what the UK spends in public expenditure in Northern Ireland and what it raises there in taxation. And it's currently estimated to be somewhere in the order of 10 billion euros. Now, that annually. There are two problems with this. One, almost certainly the estimates underestimate the amount of taxation that is currently raised in Northern Ireland, because people report, excuse me, companies report their value-added tax receipts to London rather than to the government in Belfast. Secondly, and more importantly, the estimate of what the UK spends in Northern Ireland is actually notional. It's not an actual count of what is spent in Northern Ireland. It includes, for example, the entirety of UK defence expenditure, with Northern Ireland given a 2.5% share of that. Now, Northern Ireland doesn't have any of the nuclear submarines or their bases, which are currently based in Scotland, nor does it have a proportionate share of the overall UK defence budget spent in Northern Ireland. So that isn't going to figure in a future Northern Ireland. The big question that people always raise is pensions. And at the moment, it's true that Northern Ireland has its pensions paid, its state pensions, not private pensions, paid from the UK Exchequer. Now, the question is, what would be done about those in the event of Northern Ireland joining the Republic? Well, straightforwardly, item number one is that the UK would be liable for all pension responsibilities up until the moment of unification. So those people who are already pensioners are entitled to their existing UK state pensions. The UK already pays its pensioners who live abroad their state pensions. I, for example, am entitled to a UK state pension, which I enjoy even though I live in the United States. So I don't think that that would be a fundamental problem, the existing pensioners. Those who would be transferring, so to speak, in mid-careers, then their pensions, the UK would be responsible for those pensions up until the point of unification. Let's imagine it's 2032, then the UK is liable for pension contributions up until 2032. Thereafter, people would be in the southern system. Those two big items remove most of the subvention, not entirely. Then there's the question of estimating what would be the transitional costs for United Ireland. And I think the reasonable estimates are that it might cost the Republic some small percentage of its GDP over several years. What could be done about that in terms of planning? In my view, the obvious thing for the Republic to do, which it's partly doing but not in a declared fashion, is to put its current budgetary surpluses into sovereign wealth funds, specifically dedicated to the possibility of the costs attached to unification. German unification took place suddenly without any serious advanced planning, and that's part of the reason why the costs were so tremendous. And the way in which German unification took place was a wholesale absorption of the East by the West, which was institutionally shocking to many Easterners, though they did vote for it in advance. By contrast, I think in the case of Irish unification, provided there is the right kind of advanced planning done, then I think the Republic will be able to weather the costs of unification, which will be significantly less than those attached to German unification.
Brendan, I just want to ask one more quick question because we're running out of time on our side here. If you were to be, in all fairness, put on your kind of skeptical hat and to say what the biggest downside risks are of getting it wrong, what would those be if you could summarize those briefly?
I think the biggest downside risk would be if in the interim before Irish unification there is no planning, and particularly no planning about what to do about the possibility of violence from loyalist paramilitaries. We require in the interim successful completion of police reform in Northern Ireland. It's very, very sad that at present the police service in Northern Ireland is significantly underrepresentative of the cultural Catholic community, even though in the younger age cohorts, the cultural Catholic population is a significant plurality or majority indeed in those ranks. So it's important to have a balanced and effective police force in the north before unification. Why? Because that will assist the stabilization of Northern Ireland in the event of unification. So preparation and planning for the possibility that loyalists will resort to violence before a referendum, during a referendum, and after a referendum. That fear is a genuine fear and it has to be addressed. And the only way to address it is by appropriate planning.
All right, so there's plenty to discuss in the coming months and years. Brendan O'Leary, author of Making Sense of a United Ireland. Thank you very much for that.